I'm Steven with Precision Raceworks, and today we're installing a brand new auxiliary fuel system on this X3M. In addition to that, we're also going to be installing our S58 port injection rail in billet in black and a motive reflex using our plug-and-play harness. Here you can see we are removing all the panels under the car. Before starting this project, we recommend making sure that your fuel tank is as empty as possible. To remove the back seat, simply lift up from the front to pull it out. Make sure to disconnect the seat belt and seat heater connections if equipped. While holding the metal plate up, disconnect the leak detection sensor and the fuel pump connector to move the cover out of the way. Next, remove the factory fuel line by pressing both releases on the connector. Use a lock ring tool to remove the lock ring. With the lock ring out of the way, we're able to remove the entire pump assembly, making sure to disconnect the Venturi pickup tube and float connector for the other side of the tank first. Use a razor blade to cut and remove the OEM hose from the filter output. Now use needle nose pliers to remove the pump connector and ground ring. Cut the zip ties holding the wires to the hose and remove the other float connector to discard the OEM top hat. Push the new hose onto the filter assembly, making sure that the connector is pointing up before crimping the included pinch clamp. Route the lower plug-and-play harness from the pump and zip tie it to the hose to keep it from getting caught on the float once installed. Next, we are installing the auxiliary pumps. First, install the T-shaped bracket into the square hole in the tank. Here you can see how it should look once installed. The loop should engage the catch once the center bolt is tightened. Now slide the pumps into the tank and attach them to the installed bracket. When done correctly, it should look something like this. Now you can reinstall the OEM fuel pump back into the tank, reconnecting the floats to the plug-and-play connector and also reconnecting the Venturi tube. Then connect everything to the top hat with the OEM pump going to port 1 and C1 and the auxiliary pump going to port 3 and C2. Make sure when putting any excess wire into the tank that none of it gets tangled up with the float arm. With everything connected and in the tank, make sure to reinstall your OEM tank gasket. Using a lock ring tool, reinstall the lock ring and tighten until it clicks into place. First we have the feed line. You can tell the feed line because it's a long line with a 90-degree quick connect and a straight female AN6 flare. Then you have the second part of the feed line. This runs from the filter to the fuel rail with a straight AN6 flare female to a 90-degree AN6 ORB on the other end. Then the return from fuel rail, you can tell this one because it has a 45-degree AN6 and a 180-degree AN6. Finally, the return from regulator, you can tell which one this one is because it has the 90-degree quick connect and a 90-degree AN6 ORB. This one I do recommend putting a piece of tape on so that way you can identify it later once it's in the car. Attach line clamps using the included screws to the steel brackets. Remove the factory metal plate from the regulator and use those screws to attach the regulator to the included bent steel bracket. Thread the included adapters into each end of the fuel filter. To run the lines, you first need to drop the fuel tank. You can see we are supporting the rear differential to prevent the subframe from sagging. Now you can run the lines up to the top hat, making sure to go over the drive shaft while clipping the lines into the factory clips. With both lines run to the top hat, you have to go ahead and connect them to the top hat to prevent twisting. Connect your OEM feed line to port 1, your return line to port 2, and your auxiliary feed line to port 3. Now connect your auxiliary wires to C2 and route them through the plate by cutting the grommet. Yes, I installed the plate upside down. I fixed this off screen later. Unfortunately, since this X3M is a pre-2020 model, our plug and play connector is not going to work directly, so we're going to have to cut and splice the wires together. Start by removing the tape from our connector and cutting the wires as close as possible to the connector. Then strip them back and install butt connectors. When cutting your factory wiring, we do recommend giving yourself some extra wire after the connector so you can reinstall it if necessary. Now, make your connections. If you need assistance with wire colors, our customer service team is more than happy to assist. Once all of your connections are made, simply plug your connector into C1 and reinstall the cover plate. Attach line clamps using the included screws to the steel brackets. You will need to remove the nuts holding the auxiliary coolant pump to install the second small bracket. With the lines in place, you can reinstall the tank before continuing. Now you can route the two lines that run to your port injection down from the top where the regulator will be. Thread your regulator onto your return line and install it onto the existing bolts. Then push any slack in the line back to the tank. Now install the fuel filter using the included bracket. If your car does not have the two bolts sticking down that ours has, you can simply zip tie it in place. Again, push all the slack back to the tank. Now you can connect your feed line to the filter, just making sure that it will not chafe on any sharp edges. Install the included AN6 adapter and install the return line from the port rail. On the X3M, to install port injection, you have two choices. Either fully remove the intake manifold, or remove the windshield wipers and upper cowl. We chose option 2. With the cowl out, remove the hose from the seal and remove the seal. Now remove the brace. Now you can remove the lower portion of the rear cowl. With that removed, we can unbolt the manifold and use a piece of paper to prevent debris from getting into the intake runners. After drilling the holes, use compressed air to blow out any debris and then reinstall the manifold. Once the manifold is reinstalled, you can go ahead and install the injectors into the rail and then the rail onto the manifold. When installing the lines, do not fully tighten the return line yet so you have access to connect your injectors. You need to make sure to fully tighten this, however, before starting your car or testing the system. To cleanly route the wires for the Reflex, we are going to remove one more piece of the cowl. Then use an oscillating tool to cut a path for your wires, making sure not to cut too big to prevent water from getting in. Now we will route the power and CAN bus wires into the cab of the car using our plug-and-play harness. Use the included 90-degree grommet to close off the hole. With the wires passed into the car, go ahead and put the felt panel back in place. As always the case, make sure you disconnect the battery before working with electrical components. Remove the underside panel via its 2 quarter-turn nuts and then remove the panels covering the door sill. Next, remove the white connector from the BDC and pull out the internal connectors for the CAN bus. Depin the appropriate connectors to utilize our tap. With the CAN bus wires installed, you can go ahead and reinstall them into the connector. For the power, we're going to use an add a fuse. For ground, you're going to utilize one of the grounding points in the floorboard. Make sure to reinstall the securing clips into the plastic panels and reinstall the plastic panels, making sure that the door seal goes into its proper place. Then, reinstall the cover underneath the glove box. Now we can reconnect the battery. Here we're running the fuel pressure sensor, ethanol sensor harness, and the pump activation harnesses across the engine bay to the Reflex. Now make all of your connections and tidy up your wiring with zip ties. Red and light blue are the fuel pressure sensor. Red, black, and green is the ethanol sensor harness. To connect the pump activation harnesses, we are modifying the pressure switch harness to only connect the green wires to the aux2 wire, which is gray. For this video, we are routing the pump activation harnesses from the front of the car to the back of the car. However, in hindsight, it would have been easier to route them when routing the fuel lines originally. The pump harnesses, the fuel pressure sensor, ethanol sensor, and crank sensor connection will all be routed down the corner of the engine bay. With all the wires routed to their proper locations, you can go ahead and reinstall the cowl and tighten the return line. With the pump activation harnesses routed back to the fuel pump, you can run them through the rubber grommet in the metal plate. Again, this would have been better to do when originally routing the fuel lines. Now we can install the main section of the pump activation harness. Start by removing the trunk liner and foam inserts. Now we can install the main section of the pump activation harnesses. Of course, make sure not to damage anything in the process. On this vehicle, we are routing the positive wires through the wire tray to the distribution block near the battery, putting one pump on each lug. We did have to modify the ring terminals to fit, as they are originally designed for the standard battery post. With both positive and ground connected, tuck the excess wire under the plastic panels. Then route the large 2-pin connectors and Deech 4-pin connectors under the seat to the fuel pump. Now you can reinstall the foam block, trunk liner, and now the access panel. With the harnesses routed, you can now connect the large connectors to the pumps and the 4-pin Deech connectors to the harnesses that run up to the Reflex. With all of your wiring and plumbing done, you can finally set your base pressure. To do this, you can utilize the included test plugs to activate the pumps. Using a manual fuel pressure gauge installed into the regulator, you will turn the adjustment screw until you reach a base pressure of 43.5 to 50 psi. Once set, tighten the lock nut and install your fuel pressure sensor into the regulator, making sure to use Teflon tape. If you're using 1-to-1 boost reference, you should go ahead and connect that to the regulator now. Since we already had the exhaust out, we took this opportunity to go ahead and install an upgraded stainless steel system. Obviously, this step is not really required, but it is recommended. With everything installed, let's get her up on the dyno and see what she can do. Well, that was impressive. 725 all-wheel horsepower and 704 foot-pounds of torque. Now that doesn't make it the fastest or most powerful X3M out there, but this is going to be one hell of a daily driver. To wrap everything up, we've installed an AFS 800 along with our S58 port injection kit with our 750cc injectors, controlled via MHD Plus with a Motive Reflex Plus along with our plug-and-play install harness. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe for more.